Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging these fine conventions. SoonerCon, Oklahoma's longest-running pop culture convention, is ready to return in 2023. SoonerCon 31 will be held in Norman, Oklahoma on June 30th through July 2nd, 2023. Gaming, cosplay, autographs, and an art auction await. Visit SoonerCon.com for more details. The Hellmouth Convention, where fandoms bleed together. Evoking the center of the mystical convergence, our event includes fandoms and travelers from all over the world. Like the Hellmouth itself, things gravitate toward it that you might not find elsewhere. The celebration is scheduled for June 9th through 11th, 2023 in Los Angeles, California. Go to thehellmouth.org to plan your visit.
On tap today, we have Matthew J. Elliot. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, Aaron. Thank you very much for asking me to join you.
I am thrilled to do this. I've looked over what you've done. I'm familiar with you from RiffTrax. That's where I found your work. But like myself, you're the kind of person that just pursues what you like. You chase the things that interest you, and you find a way to put it together in the end.
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate in terms of the things that I've been offered, the things that I've gone after, and some of the things that I've been successful in going after. You're not always successful, but that's the business, you know.
It is. For example, you were a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And you published for the Sherlock Holmes magazine. You've written that's how you got your start writing.
Yes, that's right.
And then you shoehorned that into writing for a RiffTrax Sherlock short movie.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a strange situation. I also I should mention I host the film evening of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London once a year. So I don't live in London, but I get to go down there once a year, and they book a room and we show, because I don't know whether you know this, but Sherlock Holmes movies are basically as old as cinema itself. So there are, like, the very first Sherlock Holmes movie is about 1900 to somewhere between 1900 and 1902. So there's plenty to go out there. So yeah, I originally wrote a Sherlock Holmes short story. This was while I was trying to get my English degree, because I had always been a very bad student when I had been younger. I thought, I'll get my English degree and then I can study and then I can start to be a proper writer. And it was while I was getting my English degree, which was at night school, that it was kind of fascinating that the teachers were less interested in the subject than we were. And so there would be evenings where half of the students would go out for a smoke and never come back. And most of the time, the teachers didn't show up either. So it was kind of a bizarre thing. And then one night I realized this is going nowhere, turned over a piece of paper, started to write a Sherlock Holmes story that was in my head. Finished off writing it at home, sent it to the Sherlock Holmes magazine, and we went on from there. But you're absolutely right. My audition piece for RiffTrax, although it wasn't my first riff for them, was a treatment of the Basil Rathbone movie Dressed to Kill, which was his very last movie, and is one of about 4 of them that's in the public domain. Nobody's quite sure why, of the 13 movies that he made, 4 of them are public domain, but they are. And that showed them that I could do what I could do.
Fantastic. I'm glad they did. And one thing I love about RiffTrax, and I'm a huge MST3K universe person, I like all of their projects, but for me, RiffTrax was the point where they took that's where they took the concept and they opened it up to the audience. They stopped using the strict formula established by the show, and they started making, just shorts or good movies. Let's not just do bad movies. Let's do good movies too. And let's let the audience make their own RiffTrax. And it suddenly became this free-for-all, which was perfect for the slightly not baby internet anymore era.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a roast essentially of whatever movie it happens to be. If it's a bad movie, then so much the better. But it can be good movies. They've done Casablanca, they've done Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, It's a Wonderful Life. You can find a way in. You can find the jokes, you can find the humor, and you can still be something that you love. I mean, this is what I'm doing with the Who riffs at the moment, which is something that I'm doing separate from RiffTrax, which is to riff. I'm going to try and riff every existing episode of classic Doctor Who. So if you go on YouTube, you should find little trailers for that. And it can be, and obviously Doctor Who, like Sherlock Holmes, is something that I very much love. So yeah, it was the right time, right place, and it was the right time for me as well. I just happened to break in and be allowed in. That's the real joy of it for me. is the fact that these are truly nice people. You find you make different relationships through different companies, and you'll find that there are different people who want different things from you, and you will find that there are some people who are reliable, some people who are not reliable, provided that you are reliable with them, obviously, if you give them the goods. But there are still some people who there was a comic company that I wrote for briefly, and the tip-off should have been that when you Googled their name, the first thing that came up was the name of the comic company and the phrase "does not pay." So
that is what you like to call a red flag.
Yeah, it should have been. Yeah, that should have tipped me off. And there are a few friends of mine who were also bitten by them, but have probably been a little bit more vociferous in their feelings about it than I have. It's just, it's just part of the learning process for me, as far as I'm concerned. Just don't do that again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And at least I can say those comic books exist, whether they are good or not.
Yeah, and it was a chance for you to try a new project. It was a chance to get something else out there in the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And they exist. That's the thing. The fact that I didn't get paid for them, that's too bad, because that was definitely something that I was very interested in. I am very fond of currency, but it's that's one of those things that didn't happen. So there are times when you sort of become aware that there are certain people who are going to let you down, but there are also going to be certain people who are going to be very, very good to you, and keep those ones as close as possible. So the RiffTrax people have always been the nicest and the best and the kindest people. I love them all. I'm in regular contact with Mary Jo and with Bridget. And I had a lovely email recently from Mike Nelson regarding, of all things, the book 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome Jacquet Jerome. This came about because we had done a riff, myself, Ian Potter, and MJ and Bridget, of the movie Last Woman on Earth, a Roger Corman movie with no "the" at the start of it. I don't know what, they didn't have the budget for a "the." So it's just The Last Woman on Earth. And within it, I think there was just a moment where there were 2 men in a boat. So I thought, well, the obvious joke here is that this is like the prequel to 3 Men in a Boat, the famous book by Jerome K. Jerome. And it was not one with which they were familiar. So that Christmas, I mailed a copy of the book to Bridget. And a couple of years later, I had this absolutely lovely email from Mike Nelson, who had read the book and had not only immensely enjoyed it, but also felt a genuine connection with the author over the gap of, a continent and also 100 years. He felt that this guy was of the same mind as he was, even though he was now long gone from this world. And it was quite a lovely thing to receive his comments on it.
For sure. And I will say my biggest surprise in discovering RiffTrax as the years went on was that at first you get used to the idea of the regular 3 riffers being kind of a substitute for the mic and the puppets. And I have found that the riffs I enjoy the most these days, the ones I look forward to the most, are the Bridget and Mary Jo ones.
Yeah.
Those 2 ladies are so talented.
Absolutely. To be perfectly honest with you, it's not my place to say, of course, but I don't think they should really come under the banner of RiffTrax Presents. I mean, I myself and Ian certainly should. Cole and Janet should, because we worked there right from the start with MST. But Bridget and Mary Jo have always been part of MST. So, as far as I'm concerned, they are RiffTrax rather than RiffTrax Presents. And they're amazing. They know exactly what they want as well. That is one of the things that if I do something, if I write something and it is not to their taste, not to their style, they'll come back and they'll tell me, and I'll work it out for them and I'll make it work. And it's very exciting when I do something and it does work. And there are jokes where you think to yourself, not in a million years will they say that, and then it comes out, and that's really satisfying. There was a really bizarre one in another movie with no "the" at the beginning of it. Woman Who Came Back recently. There was a movie where a housekeeper was constantly complaining about her arthritis, and just a moment where she receives a juicy piece of gossip and runs to the phone. And the only thing that went through my head was her saying, "Arthritis, don't fail me now." And I thought, but that makes no sense. There is no world in which that makes sense. It's just funny sounding. And thank God they did. I even put a note in to the effect, I know this doesn't mean anything, but I really think it's funny. So please.
Fair enough. And I mean, having I tried my hand at some amateur riffs here and there, and I've always wondered, when you're sitting with the pros, when you're doing this with people who have done it for decades, what's it like that first watch through the movie, where how many jokes come out when you haven't even seen the movie before?
Yeah, it's over the course. It's been about. I mean, it's been close to 15 years now for me for riffing. So I'm in a very good place with the riffing now. There are occasions where you in the past you hit a line and you think, I know there's a space for a joke here, but what's the space? And then so you put it on pause and you go to the bathroom and you wash your hands and you dry a few dishes and then you go, oh, that's the joke. But now I tend to find that the first instinct is usually the correct one. That whatever it is that you see or your first thought is when you hear that line or see that gap or that opening, there's a joke there. It can be twisted, it can be made into something. It's malleable, but you just go with whatever your first instinct was, no matter how out there it is sometimes. But yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. It was terrifying, my first go through with Bridget, which I think was on it probably was Last Woman on Earth. And we had a meeting over Zoom over it. I think this may have been pre-Zoom. It may have been pre-Zoom because Zoom really took off, of course, during COVID. And it was whatever was going before that. And I couldn't make it work. And I remember holding up a piece of paper to the screen saying, I don't know why this isn't working, bear with me. And my daughter saying, this computer doesn't have a camera. She's just looking at a blank screen now. That's doing nothing. So I think we eventually did it over the telephone. But she's very focused. She knows exactly what she wants and she knows what works. A lot of the time I just hope for the best.
Well, sure. I mean, you probably appreciate cinema on its own basis quite a bit. I mean, it's just when you riff movies, you have to love movies in the first place.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes. And this is something that I've talked about a great deal with, I say a great deal, we've only actually met once. I've only met the guys, the big three, on one occasion. But we did have some very long talks about cinema, about movies that were due to come out, about movies that were, their favorites. Kevin talking about traveling the world, which he described in the book that he wrote, to various different cinemas to see different movies under different conditions. Yeah, the Prince of Wales, is it the Prince of Wales or the Prince Charles cinema? I can never remember. I think it might be the Prince Charles cinema in London, which is where they did their live riffing show in England. Now 5 years ago to this day, as a matter of fact, that was where Kevin dressed as a nun to see a screening of The Sound of Music and won Best Costume Prize.
Well, I would give it to him for sure.
Absolutely. I think the beard really sells it. You couldn't not.
Yeah. I mean, dead ringer for Julie Andrews.
Yeah. And a beautiful singing voice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we talked a lot about movies. He talked about his love of Japanese cinema. I think at the time it was because the movie The Great Wall had just opened with Matt Damon. And I remember Kevin telling me what a great fan he was of that particular director. And so he was surprised that, this movie seemed to have been released in a way that was guaranteed that it was going to take a bath financially. When I pointed out that it was only 90 minutes long, I remember everybody around the table going, well, that's not a good sign.
When that book came out, I ordered it right away. As soon as I got it, I tore straight through it. I wrote to Kevin as soon as I was done and just thanked him for writing it. And he said his advice was, if you like movies this much, I would suggest you make one. To which I will say, I'm still working on it, Kevin, but it's on the back burner. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how other people can make movies. When I see anything, any kind of visual art, I am amazed at the way that there is a director who is able to think in those terms of the way the visuals. I don't think I could even do it to set up a conversation the way that it would look realistic. It would look like something from the movie Things, which I watched last night, and which is horrifying for all the wrong reasons.
And then that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now. Is like when you love movies, and I'm sitting down with something new, and I'm thinking one of the more bizarre movies they've done, say a Manos or one of those types of movies, where it's like, how does this even qualify as a movie?
That is the for instance, Roller Gator is the one that I usually go to. My description of it is it's barely a movie.
Mm-hmm. I spend the first spin through the movie just saying, what am I even looking at? My brain doesn't even work in the to give a response. I'm in the freezer flee mode. How is that normal?
Well, it's for Roller Gator, it is startlingly normal. The number of times that I've seen on fan pages on Facebook, people saying, I'm watching Roller Gator, I'm going in now. And then 20 minutes later, nope, can't do it. I'm leaving it. And I understand that, I do. And I remember because it is available to watch for free on YouTube via RiffTrax have very generously put a number of their movies completely on YouTube to watch, classics like Rotor, for example. But I would absolutely say to people, don't go in cold to Roller Gator. Don't even watch it like second or third, maybe fifth down the line, because nothing, whatever you do, if you do yoga, if you stretch, if you go for a long walk, if you stay hydrated, it won't matter. This is the only thing that makes this a movie is the fact that it has a movie star's brother in it. That's the closest thing to any kind of recommendation for it. It's astonishing.
And that's something I tell people who are diehard fans of this idea of MST3K or RiffTrax or whatever. Don't push newbies onto the Iron Classics, because it is so far removed from anything they know. If they like movies and they've seen maybe a Godzilla movie, show them that. Or if they like cheesy Bond movies, show them Operation 007. Show them something it's close to their existing palette. There's some things that are just too out there. I mean, for instance, the movie Things, which is, or even Winter Beast, which are, again, it's barely a movie. What the hell even is this? It seems to have been made either over the course of one night with like a ton of amphetamines, or over the course of many, many years with no clear idea of where it was going, how it began, or how it's even going to finish. So those are not the movies to go into cold. Absolutely. No, that's for the people who are looking for that weirdness, that pop of, I didn't know this even existed, because there are times you want to take something off the shelf and say, I can prove this exists. I've seen it. Well, for instance, I wrote some riffs for Bridget and Mary Jo's. I can never quite remember the title of it. Is it Earth Angel? I think we keep getting the title confused with it being called Teen Angel, but it isn't. It's actually called Earth Angel, which was a TV movie with a post Return of the Jedi Mark Hamill playing a high school student, and Eric Estrada as well playing the school bully, and Roddy McDowall as the principal. And it's about a girl who dies in the 1950s and then comes back as a ghost later on. And again, extraordinary, but it's actually my sister-in-law's favorite movie. She used to rent that out from Blockbuster back in the 80s on a regular basis. So I can't even really bring myself to tell her that it's riffed, because I think it will break her heart. People would take that personally. And that's the thing. It's like you're riffing it out of love, if not for the specific movie, out of the love for cinema itself.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I have, it's a perfectly serviceable TV movie. It's not by any means the worst that I have ever seen. It's fine, and also it's always nice to see Roddy McDowall in anything. He always gives good value in whatever he's in. Although I did recently see him in Legend of Hell House, and I think that might be his career best performance. I think it's not necessarily a great movie. It kind of falls down in the last 10 minutes, but he gives really an absolutely stupendous performance in it. And I love Roddy McDowall. I would love to have seen him play Sherlock Holmes, for example, but sadly he never did.
In an earlier episode a few weeks back, I interviewed Shyla Adante, who worked on the Christmas Dragon, which was in season 13 of MST3K.
Yes.
And I'd like to say to her, because it was I think it was the first time I talked to somebody who was in an MST3K movie project as it was being made for MST3K. It was a unique experience. I'm like, I just have to say, I respect the fact that the movies I'm watching, at some point in time, somebody sat down and thought this would be a great idea. This was a sincere effort, and that's notable.
Yeah, absolutely, 100. I agree with you. There are so many times that I become frustrated with this attitude that with whatever it is, a big budget movie that just doesn't come off. For example, a good idea, because I'm looking right at my DVD shelf right at the moment, is The Mummy with Tom Cruise. People thought it would be a good idea. Tom Cruise has got a great track record. Millions went into it. It didn't work in a big way, so to the extent that the cinematic universe that they were attempting to carve out doesn't have. So, but you will see like hundreds of videos explaining why it doesn't work. Well, there were a whole bunch of people who are professionals in their craft who were working on this with the absolute intention that it would and should work. And finally, it ultimately comes down to the taste of the public at any given time. I mean, weirdly enough, that particular film, The Mummy, has found a niche for itself on streaming services. I believe that it actually has made back a lot of money via streaming. But at the time, it just wasn't so. But that was not for a desire on the part of everybody who was involved in it. And nobody can question their professionalism to make that happen.
Indeed. And we can look at, I think of so many movies in the 90s that were comic book based, especially the early 90s, where it was a matter of, let's just grab any weird character that we can get on the cheap. Things like The Shadow, things like, Blank Man being another example, or just like they just had to make some movie and it was cheap and easy. And people were like, these movies were heralded as being dumb. And now that's like 95% of Hollywood's budget is making comic book movies on anything.
I mean, Phantom and Rocketeer and indeed The Shadow were both, were all of them, I think, very much ahead of their time.
Steel,
they were ahead of the curve. The original Punisher with Dolph Lundgren. Mm-hmm. An incredibly violent movie, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's an astonishingly violent one. I remember an interview with Stan Lee round about the time when there were a few Marvel movies out, and he was kind of baffled by the fact, but not in a bad way, because he was at least happy that one of the movies worked, was that the Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren and the Captain America movie with Matt Salinger, which you might remember. I don't know whether you've seen that one. Both came out at more or less the same time. And he said, I read the script of the Captain America movie and it works absolutely on paper. But as a movie, it just didn't work. But the Punisher seemed to. So, again, it's not without good intentions. It certainly had a really good Red Skull in it. Yeah. It's just a shame that he only keeps the makeup on for the first 10 minutes of the movie.
There's so many cases where you can go back and say, what if this movie that was made way back when was tried again today? Maybe the audience is ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am saying absolutely a lot, aren't I? But I just find that you're so terribly agreeable, Aaron. It's
I've been called worse.
Haven't we all? You should check my YouTube comments. It's what the hell was I going to say? Yes, a couple of years ago, probably longer actually, because it's COVID changed everything, didn't it? It's made the measurements of periods of time so much different now. You have to think to yourself, you have to throw in a year to maybe a year and a half because of COVID as well. So it didn't happen when I thought it did. It happened 2 years before that. But I went to a screening of Superman the movie. Took my daughter with me. The original 1978 version. The guy, it was introduced by the guy who had played the teenage Christopher Reeve, who did not grow up to look at all like Christopher Reeve. But I wasn't sure how my daughter would react to it. But she, as a huge Marvel movie fan, she saw a lot in it to love and said there was way more humor in this than I thought I was. There was a lot of Marvel sensibilities about it. And she said the only thing that I thought was weird was the whole sequence at the beginning with Terrence Stamp as General Zod being banished to the Forbidden Zone. She said in a Marvel movie, that would have been the post-credit sequence. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're absolutely right.
100%.
That's pretty much the only thing that would have been different was that you would have shifted that to post-credits. And in every other respect, it's a perfectly serviceable movie for today with, obviously with better special effects.
That movie is one that I cannot talk about objectively because I love it so much.
Oh, me too. And I love the fact that we have now recovered this. Is it it's close on 4 hours, isn't it? The TV version that was shown in the late 70s on which was shown over 2 nights on TV. This was something that was done a lot with movies around about that period. They did it with Star Trek Next Generation with a really bizarre cut that had unfinished special effects in it. They did it with the 70s King Kong with Jeff Bridges in it that was shown over 2 nights as like a 3-hour cut of the movie. And there's a much longer cut, which is mostly Smallville stuff, of Superman the movie, which is now available on Blu-ray as well. So yeah, I absolutely love that film. I adore it. I have I have an abiding memory of seeing it for the very first time in 1978 at the cinema. And this was back in the day when you could go to the movie theater and just walk in when the movie was already on, and then just stay to the next showing to catch up with what you missed at the beginning. Because I think Krypton was already on its way out by the time I got in. Like the fact that when I saw Star Wars for the very first time, we were up to Princess Leia's hologram, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope," at the time we got into the cinema, and we just stuck around to watch the beginning of it again.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where I actually feel like this was where superhero cinema started, where we because I mean, and I'm a huge fan of the George Reeve TV show. Yeah, I've seen that back and
yeah, and also the Kirk Alyn serial as well.
Yes.
There's a lots to love in that. Kirk Alyn is great. I actually love the gimmick of him becoming a cartoon when he flies. She's the Lois in that. Now that's the actress who later played Lois on TV. Am I right?
Yes,
I get confused. But I actually like her better in the Superman serial. The second Superman serial, Atom Man meets Superman, kind of falls to pieces. But yeah, there is so much to love in that, and I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like this was the perfect jumping off point for superhero movies, and it's kind of a shame that it wasn't.
Yeah, and I love those shows. But what the point I was getting at was with the Superman movie, this is the first time you believe he's flying.
Yeah,
this is the first time where, I mean, and with all due respect to the earlier Lois Lanes, when he falls for Margot Kidder, you believe he's falling for her. He's not just having a little fun with her, or playing a little like no, he is in deep with her. You see the human side of him. There's so much that starts there that wasn't there before.
Yeah, and so much of it is down to Christopher Reeve.
Yes,
it's not so much a sense that he can make you believe a man can fly. It's that you will believe Christopher Reeve is both Superman and Clark Kent, and that he can convincingly be both of them with just a change of his hair and a pair of glasses, and you will think they are two different people. And yeah, he brings to it it's a strange word to use, bearing in mind that Superman is Kryptonian, but a humanity. See, writers are always struggling with Superman. Well, what's his weakness? He can't be hurt. He can't be hurt. Of course he can be hurt, because he feels. Superman is a friend to all. He loves, he feels. That's where his weaknesses lie, and that's where, of course, Lex Luthor gets him in the movie by knowing that he can fire missiles at 2 separate locations, and Superman will be then faced with a real dilemma. And he makes you. Christopher Reeve was so 100% committed to that performance that it's really is Oscar worthy. It's such a shame that movies like that, as a rule, don't win the Oscars or don't even get consideration for them.
And it's one of those cases, like you said before, it's a shame that wasn't the beginning of the comic book movie era, because there were so many things that could have happened as a result. And now I'm just geek speculating here, but I think I'm on solid ground.
Yeah. I mean, there was certainly at least a Batman treatment that was written by John Mankiewicz, who did most of the rewriting on Superman the movie. I mean, he gets credited to, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce his name, Mario Puzo, is it, who wrote The Godfather? But in fact, the majority of the script work that was done on it was done by John Mankiewicz, who writes very good villain. I have some issues with the Bond movies that he scripted, but never with the villains. He writes really good villain, and he certainly delivered for Lex Luthor in Superman. And I remember reading an interview with him where he said years later he was booking into a hotel and he heard a voice behind him say, "It's amazing that those legs can generate enough, that brain can generate enough strength to move those legs." And turned around and it was Gene Hackman all those years later remembering the line that he delivered to describe Otis. I think one of my big regrets about the Superman Returns is that they didn't have John C. Reilly playing Otis. That seems like a given. Seems like a given to me.
I could see that for sure. And Superman Returns was another one of those movies that just wasn't at the right time, but maybe in reverse, it was a little too late.
Yeah, there's a little bit of both. I mean, it's kind of, there's a weird trilogy of the original Superman movie, for my preference, the longest cut available, the Donner cut of Superman 2, which is as close to, obviously it's not perfect, but it's as close to what we should have got or what we would have wanted to get as possible, and then Superman Returns to round it off, is the closest you can get to a satisfying trilogy of those movies. And you know, when you see what became of the series as it went on, and in particular, if you happen to watch the deleted scenes from Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, oh my God.
I don't hate Superman 4 for what it is, but it's definitely a considerable step away from the first two movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's again made with the best of intentions by Christopher Reeve. I remember him appearing about a year after it was released, appearing on a British chat show and saying to the audience, and specifically to the kids, "I'm sorry that you got ripped off," because he was promised a lot more, particularly in terms of budget, than what happened. Because it was Golden Globus, who were these two guys who had bought Canon movies, and it was like a wild ride with the movies that they made at that time, of whether what the size of the budget was going to be at any given time. It's one of the reasons why Spider-Man has become this rights nightmare, because they had the rights to Spider-Man during the 1980s or the early 90s for a movie that never got made. And I remember reading about, they also made the Masters of the Universe movie, and there's all kinds of again, the budget just goes up and down during the shooting of it, and the makers are told, no, you can't have anybody dying in it because we're trying to tie this into a kid's property. And then the next thing is, okay, well, the kid's property isn't selling very well, so kill as many people as you like, really. And in the end, Golden Globus was basically more, it seemed like they were almost exclusively Charles Bronson action movies, the sort of things that these days would go straight to DVD or straight to streaming. But they seem to make at least one new Charles Bronson action movie about every 6 months, and it will be a canon movie, and it will be shown at my local cinema, which just happened to be owned by Golden Globus.
Are you familiar with the work of Austin Trunick?
I don't believe so, no. Tell me.
He is an author who has created a hugely comprehensive guide to Canon's back catalog.
I know the book.
Okay,
yeah, I don't have it, but I'm aware of its existence. Yes.
Yeah, he was on the show. You may want to check that episode. I mean,
I shall.
This is definitely up your wheelhouse. I'll even send you a link after we're done here.
Please
for sure,
yes.
For sure. Yeah, and the one thing we'd like to talk about when we were on is that was such a strange and unique era, in a good way, of film culture, because that was the point where movies were being produced in a very high volume, because video had just really started to boom. And so it wasn't just movies you could show in the theater, it was movies you could show in the theater or on TV or on tape or on Laserdisc. And it was a case of, we have a bigger audience because there's more places to watch movies.
Yeah, and there were certain people who had become stars just by virtue of the fact that you saw their names everywhere on blockbuster shelves. I never saw a single movie with Bud Spencer and Terence Hill, but my God, I know those names from like 100 different movies. And the same with Cynthia Rothrock until RiffTrax. You know, there are certain names that Don the Dragon Wilson as well, that I like that. But I remember, I mean, Golden Globus began Canon with the best of intentions. I remember reading a story about how they brought Billy Wilder in to discuss the possibility of him working for them. And they said to him, the first thing they said to him was, can you give us a list of the things that you've accomplished in cinema? And he replied, you first.
That's good.
Yeah, as Billy Wilder would and should. Maker of one of the most underrated Sherlock Holmes movies, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes from 1970 with Robert Stevens.
Okay.
It's another famous, it's kind of like a famous unloved child, because it was made to run at an extraordinary length, probably something close on 4 hours. And then for whatever reason, supposedly with Wilder's agreement, but actually not, I'm told by somebody who had met Billy Wilder, it was then cut down to 2 hours. So there's a ton of material that doesn't exist. If you buy the DVD or the Blu-ray, most of that missing material, you will either get sound but no picture, or picture but no sound. And the truth is, all these decades later, people have been wondering, what would this movie have been like if we'd have had these missing sequences back in? And the truth is, probably not as good. So it's actually wildly, the cut that we've had all these years is the best possible version of it. And we didn't realize it until we saw what it could have been.
Getting back to Sherlock Holmes,
Mm.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, as much of a fan as you are, and I am a very surface level Sherlock Holmes fan, so I'm coming to an expert here. But with the Sherlock Holmes stuff just now hitting public domain literally with this year, how is that going to change the map? Because we've already had so many projects. What's next?
In many ways, it won't change very much at all, because what we're talking about hitting the public domain is just the last 2 volumes of Sherlock Holmes short stories. The only problems that has ever caused is in terms of the fact that anything that specifically references events in those last 2 volumes. So, for instance, the last 2 volumes are called His Last Bow and The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, and both of them have short stories within them that are set within Holmes's retirement period. Prior to that, it's all Baker Street adventures. Now we acknowledge that Holmes has retired. So if you make a movie, as happened a few years ago, the movie Mr. Holmes with Ian McKellen, and it's set during Holmes's retirement, then that causes a problem. It doesn't cause a problem in the UK because all of Arthur Conan Doyle's works go into the public domain 70 years after his death, regardless. So we've had them in the public domain for quite some time. But it's those last 2 volumes, they do cause problems for the United States. And so in those instances, there will have been cases of, well, money has had to have been paid to someone in order for this to be released and distributed in the United States. And there was also a very strange situation as well, that back in the 1950s, there was a television series, which again is now in the public domain, which was shot in France, but actually made for American television, with an actor called Ronald Howard playing Sherlock Holmes. And it actually only officially adapted one of the Sherlock Holmes stories, but Sheldon Reynolds, the producer, used that as an argument that he had held the rights, the film and TV rights to Sherlock Holmes ever since then. And even his widow, I think until very recent date, has tried to use that lever over other productions, the BBC Sherlock, and also the Robert Downey Jr. movie. But to be entirely frank, it will make surprisingly little difference. I think the only thing is now is that probably there will be less esteem attached to saying this production has the blessing of the Conan Doyle estate, because it is no longer required. That's about the top and the bottom of it. It would be nice to think that Robert Downey Jr. would finally get to make another Sherlock Holmes movie, but it's getting close on 10 years now, and I'm really not enthusiastic that it's going to happen.
I was a big fan of that particular style of those movies, and so that does pain me quite a bit that he didn't follow up on that with another.
Yeah, and it was a huge relief to me at the time, because when the movie was prior to the movie being released, prior to it even being made, I had been snuck a copy of an early draft of the script, and this was prior to the involvement of Simon Kinberg, who is mostly associated with a lot of superhero movies, including, I believe he directed the last unfortunate X-Men movie. But having seen what the original draft contained and what Kinberg brought to it, which gave me such a tremendous sense of relief when I sat down in the movies and in the first 5 minutes of the film thought, oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. And so I cannot, I cannot praise him enough for what he brought to save that screenplay based on what I originally saw and read and thought, oh my God, this is going to be awful.
And maybe as a fan, because Sherlock Holmes is so old at this point as an IP, and we have things that we love now that are just starting to show their age. They're starting to really grow, like things like Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which, is now 50-ish years old, so where are we going from here? I mean, is this, can we do you think that at some point Sherlock Holmes and Star Wars could be watered down to the point where they're just not fun anymore? Or is this just like, we have the biggest playground in the world, let's just keep having fun for the next century?
I haven't seen anything that suggests to me that watering down to that. I haven't seen anything that's been so watered down that it's been entirely unrecognizable as either Holmes or a Star Wars yet. So maybe, I mean, so a lot of the new Star Wars material seems to be very nostalgia driven, and I love that. But maybe that is why, at the same time, I'm so resistant to Andor, because it is something new and it scares me. But yeah, a lot of the Holmes stuff that is coming out now in the East. Japan is making some really, really entertaining Holmes movies and TV series. There was an absolutely fantastic series called Miss Sherlock from about 5 years ago that I know that, you know, the BBC's Sherlock series made Benedict Cumberbatch a star around the world, but it deteriorated very, very quickly, almost because of the fact that it latched onto its fan culture and started to be more about making the show for the fans than making a good show. But Miss Sherlock just knocks it out of the park. If you can track that show down, it is so, so good. And more recently, there's been another show called Sherlock Untold Stories, which again is tremendously entertaining. So I think there's still hope for them. It's interesting when we talk about things starting to age. I'm watching a lot of videos of reaction videos on YouTube. It's become a real problem for me, of people watching the things with which I am over familiar, but that they are seeing for the first time. For instance, there's one of a lovely Texan lady called Ashley Burton watching Superman the movie for the very first time, and her reactions are fresh. She knows nothing of it. She only knows Christopher Reeve from the fact that she'd seen him previously in another film that she'd reacted to, which was Somewhere in Time. And there are two guys who are watching all of the original 1960 Star Treks. And it is a kind of me watching it through fresh eyes, getting to see them coming through it with no expectations whatsoever. They've never seen it. They're not even sure what it is. They think it's a half-hour show when they first start watching it. And then that first feeling of, oh, okay, no, that was not what I expected. And now we're like 3 years in, and we're into the dreaded third season, which starts with Spock's brain. I'm thinking, okay, this is only going to go downhill. And hearing one of the guys go, I've heard what people have said, but I don't care. I just want to be with my friends again. Oh, you know, and that's that stuff. In a way, I truly believe this, that the original Star Trek has now, I mean, obviously there's a lot of 60s attitudes that we think, oh my God, I wish they hadn't. But I think the attitudes and the style of the early seasons of, say, The Next Generation are more visibly dated than 1960 Star Trek.
I can completely agree with you on that.
Thank God.
I'm a huge fan. And I will actually, people will talk about how early Star Trek is dated and cheesy, and they make jokes about Kirk sleeping with everybody. And I will say, have you actually watched the show?
Yeah.
Because and while there's a nugget of truth in everything you just said, you will be surprised at how good the writing is, and how great the drama holds up, and how relevant the stories are.
Yeah, so in fact, yesterday, these two guys, they go under the name of Target Audience, watched one of the episodes that I really never considered to be particularly remarkable, which is the one with the alien called the Medusan that lives inside the box. And I think it's called Is There in Truth No Beauty? And I've always thought of it as a very meh episode, but the sheer enjoyment from it that they got out of it, to the extent of saying this may be our favorite Trek episode ever, is just amazing to me, you know, and makes me think to myself, I need to revisit these things.
Yeah, and like I will stress to people, they went out of their way to get the best science fiction writers of the time.
Oh,
They made it a priority to use what were then movie quality effects on TV, which was a budgetary no-no, but they did it because it was what they had to do. So that translates 50 years later.
Yeah, and people don't realize. I mean, I have nothing but regard for Shatner. I know to a lot of people he's kind of a living joke. He's not to me. He always brings value in everything. He always brings complete commitment to whatever he does, even if it is to spoof himself. Recently, a few years ago, he appeared in Britain on a satire TV quiz show called Have I Got News for You? where they have like rotating hosts like they do on Saturday Night Live. So he knew what was expected of him. He knew he was expected to bring the Shatner, and he brought it to that. But if he has to do a serious role, he will do it. I have very fond memories of, there's a horror TV movie called something like The Horror at 37,000 Feet. It's a very similar title to the Twilight Zone episode that he's in. But it's round about the time of disaster movies and also of religious horror movies like The Exorcist. And it's kind of a blend of the two of those, with some sacred stones being moved, monoliths being moved on the plane. And I remember them dripping green goo from them, and Shatner playing a priest along the lines of Gene Hackman in Poseidon Adventure. And he absolutely brings it. The commitment to it is there. And I was very fortunate a few years ago to meet an actress who was aware of Shatner on his way up when he was still a stage actor, and when he was considered hot. He was the new thing. He was, this young Shakespearean actor who was really being talked about for the degree of commitment that he brought, and the energy and just the passion that he brought to everything. And we tend to forget that about him now. Oh, I've lost you.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
yeah, we talked about William Shatner, and I would be remiss if I didn't go ahead and ask you this. Have you seen the Batman Two-Face movie?
Yes.
Okay, because if you didn't know that Adam West and William Shatner were in a Batman movie together, I would have to show you this right away.
Oh, no, believe me. There was a Harlan Ellison, going back to writers who wrote on Star Trek. Harlan Ellison did write a treatment for a Two-Face script for the original 60s TV show, which never happened. And it was released as a comic book a few years back. And the illustrations in it, if I'm thinking correctly, it makes it pretty clear that they were looking at like maybe Dean Martin for Two-Face.
I had heard a young Clint Eastwood would have done it.
Ah, interesting. The actor, I wish I could remember the actor who played him in the recent those recent HBO radio shows. A very good actor who really brought something different to the role of Two-Face. And they're very, very peculiar, very striking audio depictions of Batman. Have you heard them?
No, I have not, and I'm very interested.
Okay, HBO have done these things. They've done 2 seasons of it now. Jeffrey Wright is the voice of Batman. I think you can actually watch them on HBO, but all you will see is an old tiny radio, and then it plays the show. And the show features, they will have like regular commercials in the middle of it. So for instance, in the second episode, I think there is a wonderful public service announcement for Gotham teens, warning them against the dangers of taking scarecrow drugs. So for, staying on the straight and narrow when you're in high school, kids. And a lot of SNL actors, which seems to suggest to me that it's probably recorded in New York. So Kenan Thompson plays Commissioner Gordon, because of course he does. Melissa Villaseñor is Dick Grayson, and Seth Meyers plays a guy who's some sort of late night TV host in Gotham. So I've heard an episode where just the first 15 minutes of it is him going around the streets of Gotham, asking people their views on the Batman, and eventually speaking to a poor little boy on crutches and saying, "You've got the real Gotham spirit, kid," before realizing he's actually being held up by the kid.
That is awesome. I'm going to have to look into that for sure. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
No problem. It's a terrific show.
Like I could go on about this all day, and knowing that you're Trekkie makes me want to have a conversation about just that.
Oh, but absolutely, yeah.
I don't want to wrap this up before I give you a chance to let people know where they can follow your adventures on the internet and find more of your work.
Yeah, okay. Well, I have a few things here. For instance, I wrote a couple of books which were official spin-offs from the movie Big Trouble in Little China. So I did 2 of those, Big Trouble in Mother Russia and Big Trouble in Merry Old England. If you visit, I've also a radio script writer, mostly for American radio. So if you were to visit the website harrynile.com, Harry Nile is the name of a recurring radio detective who's been on the air since the 1970s, created by Jim French. But I write all of the shows now. I am the in-house writer for Imagination Theatre. I've written something like 391 plays at last count. You'll find a ton of them there to download. You can also visit the Imagination Theatre page on YouTube, which regularly updates with brand new shows once a week. I am the creator of a few of the shows that I do write Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, also the creator of Murder in the Murdochs, which is a comedy mystery series starring Cynthia Lauren Tweez, who you probably know as Julie, your cruise director from The Love Boat.
That is, go ahead.
Yeah. And also, hang on, I was trying to think. I've done a few Doctor Who audios for a company called Big Finish. That one is signed by Sophie Aldred. Ian Potter wanted to got us to sign it. He wanted her to write, "What is this shit?" on it, but she wouldn't do it. And in addition to that, I mentioned before the Who riffs. You can find me on Patreon, and every week I do a riff of a classic 1960s, 1970s, 1980s Doctor Who episode. I've done close on about 40 of them now, and I've got like 50 years worth of material to go at. So it should keep us going for a while.
Everything you just mentioned is going to be available in the show notes of this on my website, aaronbossig.com. So people will have a direct link right to everything they can look at. Matthew, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. It has been great. Pleasure. You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to come back and talk Trek, talk Star Wars, talk Superman the movie until the cows come home.
Let's make that happen.
Yeah, you bet.